Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Systemic Leadership Summit 2020 Q&A session. I'm Jennifer Campbell, as you know by now, and I am so excited to be doing the Q&A for and with you. You're not going to be seeing too much of me today because I brought along a presentation which I'll be sharing in a minute, and I'll share my screen and then we can get started. So let me do that. So sharing my screen. Great, so let me put it up. A couple of slides are moving. So here we are with my presentation. Again, welcome everyone. The Q&A SLS 2020 closing session. It's January 19. And yeah, what I want to do today first is say welcome again. We've had an incredible week and with over 23 speakers to share their experience, their viewpoints, their theories and practices with us from all different angles when it comes to the subject of systemic leadership. We're closing off the 4th edition of this summit. We've had it every year since 2017. And there's a number of things that I want to cover with you in this Q&A. Now, first of all, we'll do a short review in terms of the summit, the participation. I'll go through key points of individual speaker sessions, so of all the speakers who've been in conversation with me for an hour or a little over an hour. And I also want to share with you some main themes across the sessions. Then I was going to be looking into Q&A, but what I've noticed is that many of you are still very much in reflective mode and trying to absorb everything that you got from the sessions. I looked on the online community, and there's some remarks and insights which are very profound and very deep, what I've seen. So thank you so much for sharing and interacting there so far. But I haven't seen any questions, so we'll see if someone pops on to share a question, and otherwise we'll continue with the summit evaluation and the All Access Pass winner for today. I sent you an email earlier today, January 19, to invite you to our survey. It's actually quite an extensive one, and that's why I want to be just say thankful for you filling it out. It's very important information and feedback. So thanks again for joining. What's important to know is that I also want to share in this Q&A what's next after the summit. So how can you continue with your participation, and how can you make the most out of your All Access Pass if you have one, and what are other ways to continue your learning? And then I'll close off with some closing words. So thank you so much for joining again, and this is all that we'll be covering. Now, some general feedback about the summit. So 23 online sessions, they were programmed over 7 days, but you actually have 9 days to watch them on our YouTube channel. We've had 161 paid registrants. Something that's different compared to other years is that we've had no free participation format this year. And so everyone who is on this summit, who participated, has made a smaller or bigger investment to access all the sessions. And I am stunned every year from how many different countries our participants come. So even when we have a smaller participant base compared to other years, because of what I just explained, because there's no free format, we still have people from all continents join our summit. So thank you so much for your participation. So when we do a review, so that was more in the general sense, then what we see is that the most viewed summit session was with Ed and Peter Shyne about humble leadership and their way of looking back on how the concept of organizational culture has evolved and how they want to challenge current leadership theories. And so humble leadership was their way to go, and that was viewed the most. It was the first speaker session, apart from my kickoff and my introduction about the value of systemic leadership. They were the first on the program on Monday, and they were most viewed. So thanks a lot to Ed and Peter. Let me go into the main points, and I want to do this briefly because you are going to have your own take on what were the key points per session. It just really depends on your experience, on your favorite speakers, who you really were looking forward to seeing, whether you let yourself be surprised by some new people, some new speakers, but I just want to share a summary with you. And so a week ago, exactly a week ago, I shared with you some key points in the kickoff. And again, apart from the overall welcome and all the practicalities around the summit, I also shared with you the Systemic Change Leadership Framework, which is a framework that has an underpinning for this summit also. So the three categories of see the system, share the space, and shape the shift were also leading in how to schedule all the summit speakers. And so it's not rocket science in a sense that they were precisely categorized, by no means. That would severely limit and downsize everything, the value of the speakers and what they shared with us. So that's not how it's meant. But it's just to accelerate your learning and your understanding of what their viewpoints and experiences were. And I also shared this framework to see if there is an integrated approach to creating sustainable change capacity building in an organization. So what can you do as a leader, not just to implement change sustainably and create a sustainable organization, but also to build on the change and innovation capacity in an organization. So those are the key points in my session. This is what I showed you back then, what I spoke to a week ago about how on the left, the framework was the underpinning for the programming of all the speakers on the right. I also invited you to think about the value of systemic leadership during the week as you were watching the sessions. And still, if you have any questions or comments, when we get to that section, I will definitely open the mic or invite you to ask any questions or make any remarks about that, if you wish to do so. When we look at Ed and Peter Shyne, then, I already spoke to that a little bit just now because they're the most viewed video, is what I found striking is that is their view on culture, obviously, and how Ed Shyne also shared that culture is a complex concept in itself, a complex system in itself. And so it's very important to not just, to not really focus on bashing all the culture myths, but to understand that it's a complex thing and that humble leadership means that you as a leader do not know all the answers and that you need to be humble enough to go into your organization and see where you can find the answer. And one way of doing that is to make sure that your leadership is at a level 2, meaning that you create such relationships with the people in the organization that there's a sufficient amount of trust that is needed to create change and innovation or the new piece of information and knowledge that's necessary to help the organization move forward. So those are the key points for Ed and Peter. When we move over to Arowana, then with this explanation of social presencing theater and what it means to actually take an embodied view on how can you make systems visible, but how can you also sense through your own body where the system is actually moving and what it wants to do, and that has not necessarily has anything to do with what you wanted to do, but that you really have a sense of what it wants to do. And she says what they do in social presenting theater is also to make true moves and to let yourself be moved by the dynamics in a system that you are at that point representing. And also let yourself be informed if there's stuckness in any way in yourself, in the social body that you are in, or anything else, and stay with it and find a sense of calm and meditation in it, because then the information that you need to take the next step will come to you. So that about Arowana. Dave Snowden. Dave's session is one that many people saw the trailer of and we're looking forward to and have enjoyed. And in my conversation with him, we talked obviously about the Cynefin framework, but apart from that, we really went deep into sense making. And he had all these different methodologies and examples and experiences of how he assisted others in organizations, sometimes also very big organizations or very deep organizations, to make sense in complex situations. And what was very striking to me at the end, because Dave has his typical way of sharing his knowledge and sharing stories. And at the end, he also shared that his ultimate goal for doing all the work that he does is to make management more human. And I found that a very striking end at a very intense conversation. When we go to Joan, that was the last speaker. She was the last speaker on the Monday, where, and we scheduled it a bit late compared to the other sessions through the week because Joan lives in Australia, and we wanted everyone in Australia to join the session at a, for them, normal daytime timing. So, and Joan talked about various culture myths, but especially also the shift in terms of patterns and shapes and frames around leadership roles, and how as soon as you put on a new pair of glasses, as she called it, when she woke up to the systemic view of organizations and of life, that that change can actually happen fairly quickly once you step into that paradigm. And so for leaders, she calls leaders forth to really remap their role as leaders and understand what it means to lead in a systemic context. So very interesting exchange with Joan. Now, when we move on to the Tuesday with Jan Jakobstam, the key takeaways there were, and many people also shared this with me, like, oh, this is really interesting to talk about systems or organizations as that their function is to continue, and that patterns emerge and are in place in support of that continuation. But there are also two other aspects when you look at where an organization is going or where systems are going. And that is free will. And that's usually the thing that leaders grasp when they think, oh, I'm going to take the organization in a particular direction. So that's a free will part. And or if the organization is moving in a particular way, asking the question, is this where we want to take it? And then there's the evolutionary force, he explained it as the big wind that blows through organizations and society and across the globe, and sort of takes all these global developments in a different direction. He also explained what constellations are. Some of you had questions about that in the online community. What is a constellation? He had a beautiful description of his way of working, which is phenomenological, and constellations are an example of that. So how can you make a visual representation of a system in the room, and how do you work with representatives? So what I also find striking, not so much in the sense that it's a theory or an experience or a knowledge that he wanted to share, but more about himself. And that is his stance that he does not want to change anything in the world. And that he's there and available to help organizations open up potential. But in essence, he does not want to change anything, which is a striking way to look at life. Then with Glenda, also on the Tuesday, we talked about how can you create adaptive action? How can you look at complexity in a different way? And she shared some really important aspects of the human systems dynamics that she has developed and teaches through the Human Systems Dynamics Institute. And she shared with us that it's very important to make a couple of shifts as leaders, especially when it comes to the liminal sort of times that we find ourselves in, that when things are so complex that expertise is important and expected, but it's no longer enough. What is also very important to embrace as a leader is the skill of inquiry, the skill of asking questions, and but especially to know how to balance between the expertise and the inquiry, and to know when to use what. So there's some processes in organizations where you just need to have this expertise as a leader, and in others, inquiry is much more suitable. She also shared about 4 different rules to take adaptive action that you can constantly use, and that is to replace judgment by curiosity, and conflict into shared exploration, defensiveness into self-reflection, and assumptions into questions. And once you do that, it's very surprising how you find yourself in a different place when dealing with complex situations. So that was Glenda. Then we go to Benjamin, and we talked about a lot of things when addressing paradoxes and polarities and paradigm shifts in systems work. And what I found intriguing is the type of systems and complexity minefield, as he called it, and the categorization of naive enthusiasts, oversimplifiers, gurus, and curmudgeons. I still have difficulty pronouncing that word. But he explained that if you have a tendency to do either one of these, then it's going to keep you stuck and not help you to leverage all that systems thinking and complexity have to offer. He also explained, I'm not going to read all of them, but he also explained different elements of dark matter, as he called them. And he says this is really important for leaders who are dealing with complex change and who want to use a systemic approach to start looking into and to understand. And if you know what the impact is of these 6 elements on the system, then it's going to make you so much more effective in guiding change and dealing with complexity. Debra was the last one on Tuesday in her timing, and with her I talked about still moving. And what was really apparent is that Debra has such extensive experience in leading change in all kinds of context in the corporate world, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a coach to executive boards. And she has a background in anthropology, and she shared that leading like an anthropologist, and now I'm seeing it, it reminds me that I need to put the article that she mentioned there in the, I'll probably put it in the online community space as well, both also in the membership area. So I'll look it up and put it there. But it's about making the familiar strange and making the strange familiar. That is what anthropologists do. And that so much supports a change process where it is about actually integrating differences and dealing with difference. And so by that process of making the familiar strange and making the strange familiar, it's actually guides that process of difference integration. Also, it's very important to know in which context you find yourself, and that there's no one-size-fits-all change process or change approach that fits in all kinds of organizations, because they all have their different way of what works and what does not work, and it's very important to take that into account. And then the still moving is about the inner work and finding the stillness in you, the silence in you. And on the other hand, to keep on moving forward and keep on changing in that sense. So the importance of quieting down the mind and leading change in a mindful way, especially also from a self-care perspective for leaders. Moving on to the Wednesday, and with Louis Klein, I talked about governance, purpose, change, and potential in organizations. And we had an intense discussion about civilization. He shared the way we built our civilizations. There are some flaws in that, and that's where we are today. And it's not pretty. And so it requires that we reconsider, how do we govern, how we organize ourselves, how we coordinate ourselves, how we build societies. And purpose is a very big part of that, because purpose supports us in creating the narratives that we bring into the world, that we share, that we talk about all the time, to reinforce the evolvement of our civilizations. So very interesting talk also. With seats, as you may have noticed, we talked about moving questions. And there are questions that are analytical, and there are questions that are systemic. And seats is all about asking questions that help the system to find more exploration and more possibility. It's not about finding the right answer. It's not about being attached to a particular outcome once you ask a question. It's more focused on the inquiry and the exploration of new possibilities than anything else. And she shared 2 moving questions that you can always use, especially also as a leader, for example, and maybe make a commitment to yourself to use one of them for an entire month, and to see what happens when continuously, when you walk through life and lead the people you lead, to ask this moving question. And the 2 examples are, how old is this? So that's one. And the other one was, if you want this, if you see this, if you desire this, or if you feel strong about this, then what are you connected to? So 2 great moving questions you can always ask. Then with Nora, a very intriguing conversation. We always have intriguing conversations. If you've seen my interaction with Nora, then you'll know. And we talked about, actually, I started off the question before we went into the warm data and the warm data labs. I asked her the question about where are we in the world? And she said, we find ourselves in a place of utter confusion. And what's important to understand is that the old ways of assessing where we are no longer work, and the new ones have not emerged yet. So we are in that transition period between the caterpillar and the butterfly. We are in that liquidizing type of liminal space. And the terms like intersteeping, transcontextual, the interconnectedness, those are not just concepts that she knows, but things that she works with and invites us to work with to be in that space. And she had many different examples, also from her own life, where, for example, her daughter asked her, is there a possibility for me to be a good person? How can I be a good person? Because if everything is interconnected, then there is actually no space for me to be separate from many not so beautiful and sometimes very negative things that are happening in our lives or in our societies and communities and organizations. And so, and when we then moved into the warm data and the warm data labs, it's about understanding how you can create meaning making. She doesn't use sense making, she used meaning making in multiple contexts, multiple systems at the same time. And so it's about learning the skill of being in the soup of the utter complexity where you can no longer detangle things, and to work with that. And so yeah, if you haven't seen it yet, and if you have an all access pass, please go and watch Nora's session, because it's just amazing. Then we have, with Max, we talked about deep democracy and how he works with whole systems to resolve conflict. And what deep democracy entails, amongst other things, is that it's very important to hear all voices in a system, to see all perspectives, and especially look for the marginalized ones. There's always marginalized viewpoints, voices, perspectives, ideas, people, however you want to call them, in a system. And usually they hold very important information. And with deep democracy, you invite that information to come in. And usually when there's a conflict, it means that a marginalized voice has had enough and becomes louder and louder and louder until it bursts. And deep democracy is his way of doing it, and he works with really big groups, is to be on that edge of escalation. And he loves doing that because there's a lot of energy there. And if you can hear a marginalized voice, then you're able to use that energy also for the benefit of the whole system, and not just for the marginalized voice, but for all involved. So very interesting conversation with Max. Then with Brian, we had an intense and fairly fast-paced conversation about the flow system. And in the flow system, he shared about the triple helix that's in it. And that has to do with the understanding of organizations as complex adaptive systems, the importance of embracing team science, of the art of collaboration. Actually, in the traditional sense, we do not collaborate so well, especially on projects, for example. And we still approach it in a way that is not helping to get the utmost, get the best from the complex adaptive system that the team is or that the organization is. And the third aspect of that was distributed leadership, or systemic leadership as we call it. And so he shared about how he worked with that and how this approach emerged from working together with two other people. And the three of them created the system. And he also shares about that process and how a unique combination of totally different people with totally different backgrounds and experiences, how they came together and created something that they would have never been able to create on their own or in other combinations with other people. So he talked about all kinds of different aspects, also about the OODA loop, the observe, orient, decide, act loop created by Boyd, that is also working nicely with the complex adaptive system work that he does. Let's see. Moving on to Jeremy Lloyd. With Jeremy, I had a conversation about actually a case study, a situation where he was a leader in business and he received an assignment from the top in his organization to create a new brand. And especially new branding around the service side of that comes with normally a product that gets sold. And it was a very specific situation in the medical device industry where people with diabetes need to use equipment, need to use things that support them. And there's a service that comes with that. And so what they did is they approached it in a traditional way of how marketing works. And when presenting it at the board, something was off. And everyone felt it was off, but couldn't say why it was off. And that's where our journey started in a more systemic way of looking at marketing and branding. And this is also a little bit tied to deep democracy in the sense that they started really, really stepping into the customer and how they experienced the service side. So not the product, but the service side, the support side, and how important that was in their lives. And what turned out is that that knowledge was also available within the organization because many people in the organization were diabetic themselves or had close relatives who had diabetes. So actually that information was already present in the system about how important the service was, but it was never tapped, never highlighted, never used to position themselves in the market. And they found a different way that worked really well. So very nice case study about a systemic approach to marketing, which I found very intriguing because the combination of those two words, marketing and systemic, I don't hear that often. Then we had Pilar, and I just want to say upfront, apologies for what happened to the sound. I think that she was in a space where there was a lot of echo going on, so she was quite difficult to hear. But if you have an all access premium pass, we do have a transcript as of tomorrow waiting for you in the membership area. So you can hold that with you as well as you're listening, because Pilar had a very important message she shared about diversity and inclusion in business, and how this emerged for her as a leader in the corporate space, and how she started small, and how this sort of grew to big initiatives and big waves in the organization to include people, and how to demonstrate the business case for the importance of diversity inclusion and how it benefits corporations. And so she had a number of examples, what happened to her as a leader, what happened to the people she worked with, and what the otherwise, what happened to the relationships that she built that she would not have built had she not been actively working on diversity and inclusion, and what that brought for her team, and her organization. So moving on to Giles. Giles Hutchins talked about the journey for a leader, and what actually happens in his mind, or what needs to happen in order for leaders to make a shift to the ecosystemic, to a type of leadership where you can generate and regenerate and navigate the ecosystemic. And so he said, we need to have the mind where we have systems thinking. We need to have systems awareness, which is the embodied part of systems thinking. And then there is the ecosystemic awareness. And that has to do with the sense of deep connection with life, and how everything and everyone is interconnected in the big thing we call life. And how he creates a space of trust for people to, especially leaders in suits and ties, to step into this and to take their first steps in their journey towards this type of leadership, and to really expand their leadership as well. So very nice conversation with Giles. Then we're moving on to the Friday. On Friday, we started off with Meta Bill, and she talked about shape-shifting education. And the very important part of that is that she said that she, in collaboration with Peter Senge and others, that they are working on curricula for teachers and for bigger players in the education world, to make a combination between systems awareness and compassion. And what was interesting and what was striking to me is that compassion elicits a space of safety and of trust, and which is most welcoming to working with the systemic, and understanding that you can create a learning environment from that. And so what's very important is that even though there are big organizations and educational institutes working with them to create curricula, then it's very important to spread this information locally, so that locally translations can be made to what's applicable locally, with that combination of something that is about systems awareness and about compassion. So very nice conversation with her also, where she, a conversation in which she also shared about her path, and how she ended up learning what she actually wanted to learn and contribute to the world, and that is where she finds herself now. Yeah. Patrick Hoverstadt was next, and he and I talked about the viable systems model, and I asked him about why this model was more suitable for creating sustainable organizations than others. And even though it's not his, the VSM, but he does work with it as a consultant with organizations. And he said it's really about looking at designing and creating organizations that sustain themselves. And the VSM is very much created from the model in nature where systems and organisms sustain themselves and regenerate themselves. And so that was then mapped onto what does that mean for organizations. What's also important to know, by the way, our conversation was filled with sense of humor, so that was great. Also, some people responded to that as finding that enjoyable. But we also talked about the role of consultants and how they should be aware that leaders sometimes project their, let's say, systemic energy onto consultants, because consultants come from the outside, and actually on the surface they are meant to bring something new. Sometimes leaders project their fear or their ideas about what consultants bring onto the consultants, which keeps the knowledge out. And so there's a awareness and learning creation for both leaders and consultants to be aware of these type of dynamics. And we talked also about how Patrick, as a consultant, how he worked with that in a number of experiences that he had when working with clients. Then we go on to Laura. And with Laura, I had such a great conversation about sustainability and what it takes to actually sell the idea of sustainability, and how to not make it a story about doom and gloom and about negativity around climate change and all those things, but that it's actually about emphasizing that the sustainable way is a way to enhance the quality of life, to have a better life, and that's what it's about. And how she, in all kinds of different ways, in business, in government, from an early age on, was doing presentations. She's been in activism. She's been in all kinds of different platforms. She led a company that she co-founded called Sustainia. And that at some point she figured out, after having an accident, that she was not so sustainable to herself. And having those two stories in parallel, the business side of sustainability, as well as her own story about being forced into silence and complete own system shut down, her body just shut down, and how she learned that sustainability comes from the inside out, and that we need to start with ourselves. And this has to do with what we do every day, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the places we go to, etc. And that sustainability starts there, and elevating the quality of life also starts with ourselves. The last one on Friday was Martin Galungu-Banda. And Martin is an amazing storyteller. And with his stories, he shared about, first of all, when he works with leaders, he mentioned that it's so important for leaders to find alignment between themselves, where they want to take the organization, and somehow balance between the two. And the other challenge that leaders have, that he sees, is to not abuse their power in the negative sense. So in the stories he shared about learning from the emerging future, and what he does himself from his own role and taking his own leadership and working with really big people like presidents of all kinds of countries, and how he lets himself be taken by what is created. We do not create ourselves. Life creates itself, and what we can do is align with that and take action in accordance to that. But we should be able to hear it first and allow ourselves to be taken by that. And he also talked about presencing, about being present in the moment, and to hold space in that, so that when he works with leaders, they can do their process and feel his presence. So he said it's very important to also work with coaches, or if you guide leaders, how important it is to have that presence. Then we move on to yesterday's sessions, and they're still open for viewing. So you can still watch them. With Wendy, I have a very fast-paced conversation about innovation, about business, about capitalism and conscious capitalism, and what's the difference between those two, and how innovation is a human process and not necessarily about disruption or technology or digitalization. That's not what innovation is about. Innovation is very much about the human process of having emotional intelligence as a leader, and to also understand that there's inner work to do rather than just outer work with people. And so including yourself is something that she also experienced when she had her third burnout and understood, wait a minute, I'm including everyone except myself. And so how do I do my inner work to understand who I am, how I show up in systems, how I show up as a business leader, and what that means to create something new. So, fast-paced conversation with Wendy. Then my conversation with Stuart. He shared about many things, but what sticks out in my mind a lot is actually this session is two parts. One is about the ecological way of enabling change from his experience, and at some point we move into something very practical where he shares with me, and I'm his guinea pig at that point, a process where you can disrupt yourself. It's called the lying exercise. And as you will see, if you haven't seen it yet, he invites people, or in this case, he invites me to share a big lie, something that is completely not true, and to be really vocal and open about it, and end with a loud haha. And by going through this process, I could feel how you disrupt your own old patterns of what is socially acceptable or what is good to say or not to say. You just disrupt yourself and go straight through to a place that has much more life energy and much more creativity and much more place for innovation, and to then see what the first step is you can do towards that, and what is the first thing you can do to communicate that, to lock in your commitment, was a very profound process to go through. So if you haven't watched yet, then maybe you want to do the process along with me as you guide me through it when you're watching, or go through it again. But yeah, something in a more general sense about enabling change, and a very tangible and concrete process on what you can do yourself. Then we have the last one in the row of 23 speakers, and that is Oren Egel. And with her, I talked about complexity action. And in her social acupuncture project, she really wanted to find a way to somehow convert all of the complexity theory into inventing something new. And so besides teaching about complexity at university, what she also does is she's an entrepreneur, and she created a new product, a new service, and she explains how she put complexity into action, and that it's very important to also see what supports change and what does not support change, and that it's also a very disruptive process, and how she navigates that process to make sure that the action she wants to take, or the invention that she's putting out there in the world, that's going to stick. So also a very nice conversation with Oren. And this was the overview of all the speakers. And so what are some of the themes? Besides the underlying framework that I shared with you in the kickoff, there are also some, so these three, the see the system, share the space, and shape the shift, that's part of my framework. But there were also some other themes. Let's see if I can continue. Yeah. So one that's very obvious is the movement from the linear to the systemic, and that process of guiding leaders from the linear to the systemic is not easy. And many a speaker has gone through this journey or is still on this journey, and shared from their own experience the difficulty they found themselves in, or the mirrors that they did not like looking in and seeing a lot of ugliness, or being thrown back, or paused by their own bodies because they were not treating themselves in a sustainable way, but also in a way that is not very systemic. Another theme is the human part, or the humanizing. And some spoke about this in relation to automation. For example, with Brian Rivera, I talked about this, and he said, it doesn't make any sense to want to automate everything because there's certain things that human beings are so much better at than robots. And so it's about how do you create human robot or human automation teaming to deal with really complex situations. And human in the other sense is also that the humanizing management, or humanizing business, or the conscious capitalism, or a more human way of looking at or shaping your leadership, or making it more personal in the level 2 relationships that you create as a leader in your organization. So very much about human. Many speakers talked about agile as a buzzword and as a hype. And I wonder what the impact was on all kinds of people who work with agile on a day-to-day basis, or are agile coaches who also attended the summit. So if that's you, let me know what you thought of that. But it was interesting to see how many people mentioned that. And also a theme was how systems thinking is used, and whether it's only used in a technical sense, or that's where it originated from, or that it's used in a totally different way. And we have different viewpoints on this. So yeah, it would be interesting to review the sessions again and see, okay, who's saying what about this? Because it's an intriguing theme. And then my invite to you about what is the value of a systemic approach to leadership in general and change leadership specifically. And it's a question that I've been working with for at least 10 years, 4 of which in these summits. And so if you have anything that you want to share about that, please go to our online community space, or write me an email. That's also fine. But yeah, I think it's a joint sort of thought process to create more of it, because that's also part of the mission of this summit, why I created the summit and why it's out there. And many people resonate with it. And I think it's time that we create even a stronger idea of what the value actually is. And then there was, it's not a theme, but it's a wish. One of the speakers said, why don't we have a debate? I wish that we had a debate. And so I'm very open for that. I called a couple of other speakers. Some are up for it. We cannot make it work to have it part of the summit. So we're going to organize this at a different time, but I'm very open to moderating a debate between a number of speakers, and see what happens when we have a couple of them behind the microphone or in a Zoom call or somewhere, and discuss a number of themes that we saw in this summit or in the larger context of the systemic. So that would be great. So to be continued in that sense. Okay, so I did my summary and we've come to the Q&A, and like I said at the beginning, I didn't find any questions in the online community space that were specifically posted there for the Q&A, or anywhere in the online community space, nor in our inbox, our email inbox, besides from a couple of technical questions in terms of where can I log in for this and this. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask me, then please unmute yourself, or what you can also do is put something in the chat, and then I'll find it there. And then I may unmute you for a second. So yeah, does anyone have a question? So we have seats, we have Susan, we have Claire. So we have all ladies tonight. So if you have a question to me about anything, Jen, just let me know. If not, we're just going to continue. Okay, Seats, I see a question from you in the chat. Hi, Jennifer, can you say something about how having all these interviews, your work as a professional? I think I missed a word in the sentence. I'm not sure what you mean. So Seats, if you don't mind, could you just unmute yourself? And is it how it impacted my work or how I work with it as a professional? So I'm not sure what you mean. So, oh, how it has changed my work. Okay. Well, it has profoundly changed my work. I have done over 80, I think 85 interviews over the last 4 summits. And what it has done is really developed an even deeper skill of listening and a deeper skill of deep democracy in my work. And so having all these conversations with experts and thought leaders, but also leaders in the trenches, people who work in big corporations, to share their stories and their experience, has allowed me to work with my clients more intensely. It has also impacted me in a sense that I find it more and more difficult to work as a traditional change manager who leads organizations or helps leaders to lead organizations from A to B. That for me no longer works. So it helped me to be a better leader in my own business, even though it's a very small business, in the sense that I do not lead that many people. But it has done a lot for me, my own leadership. It has given me a sense of what it is like to bring all these people together and create a system, a space for learning and for transition. I've learned what that means for me, from what kind of stance I need to come. And on the content side, last year I started creating the framework to see, so what is the tapestry of all this? Because what I missed was some connections between systemic approaches. And I thought that, to my surprise, many who work in the systemic do that in a fragmented way. Like, okay, there's only one method, that's this method, and this is what I follow, and this is what I do. In using the summit, it's also my way of creating more bridges in the systemic field. And the framework is something that I use now. And I just wanted to share it with all of you in the summit, because what I've done is to see, if I throw it through my filter, how would I somehow see the connections, or where would I see that all these approaches fit in a bigger field that I would call systemic change leadership. So, Seats, thank you for your question. It has impacted me in all kinds of ways, not just professionally, but you asked me about my work. So, yeah, that's my answer. Okay, so you're in a noisy environment, you won't unmute. Okay, you're right, thank you. Well, you're very welcome, Seats. Let's see if there are any other questions about the summit sessions, about the speakers, about what happens next. I still have some things that I want to share with you. So let's see if anyone else has a question before I move on. I'm going to take a sip of my tea. I haven't done that yet. Anyone else? Any questions? Oh, that's very nice. Claire says, I think you have done a great job of pulling that thread through all the diverse speakers together. Thank you. Well, you're very welcome, Claire. Yeah, I really hope that the framework is of use to you. It's still in development, but I am working with leaders with that. And I am very grateful to all the speakers, because if it wasn't for all those conversations, the framework wouldn't be there either. So, but thanks anyway. And Sichi asked me, do you still like the systemic approach? To me, it sometimes starts to feel restricted, and I find myself looking further. Well, let me think about that one. Do I still like the systemic approach? Well, what I resonate with is wanting to look further. And it reminds me of what Benjamin Taylor shared in his categorizing of systemic and complexity behavior, and how people sometimes um, put it in a particular box. So they become overly enthusiastic or guru-like, or they oversimplify, or they say kumbaya, this is it. And there's sometimes downsides to the systemic. I mean, sometimes a nail is just a nail and nothing else. And so no need to look at it systemically. But I find it useful there where, and I resonate with young Jakob when he says, I used constellation work to help um, um, see where their potential is. And yeah, there's something finite about the systemic also, like it's like it has with everything. Um, but for now, it has fueled me. And as long as I feel a healthy curiosity towards more systemic approaches in my work or in creating summits, I will continue to do so. If I feel like I need to move on, then I'll probably will. So I hope that answers your question. I'm looking at the chat to see because you don't unmute, so I'm just, okay. All right. Yes, thank you, she writes. Well, you're welcome, Seats. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to move on with you. And by no means you are restricted to this time to connect with me. If you have any other questions, just find me in the online community space or on LinkedIn, or write me an email and we'll have a chat. So we're almost done with the Q&A, but we have the evaluation part. Today I sent you an email with a very lengthy link with a request to fill out a very lengthy survey. And I send out this survey every year, and I'm still surprised at the massive response I always get. But invite again to you, if you haven't seen the email yet, please go and find it in your inbox. It's going to be open until next week, Sunday, so January 26th, end of day Central European time. And in return for your valuable time and input, I give you 3 things. One is that you can download my ebook if you haven't done so already. That's available to you. The link is at the end. Actually, you will be redirected to the download page as soon as you complete the survey. Then there's an opportunity to have a call with me. It's just going to be a free strategic session to see where you and your organization find yourselves when it comes to systemic change leadership, because that's what I'm all about and what the summit is also about. And it's so it's a free call that you can have with me. And then you could also win an all access pass to all summits. So not just this one, but all of them. So 2017, 18, 19, and 24 summits, over 80, 85 hours of speaker sessions. And so we have a couple of really big names in there, like Peter Senji, Peter Hawkins, Marshall Goldsmith, Myrna Lewis, Margaret Wheatley, Fritjof Capra. I talked to all of them, Brian Robertson. There's so many people who are in there. My list of wanting to have speakers is becoming shorter and shorter because I eventually speak to all of them. And you will be able to have access to all the videos and all the audios. So you can listen to them in your car or wherever, or you can watch them wherever. And there were 2 ways to win one. One was today. So if you filled out the survey today, then you have a chance to win one today in the draw. And I must say, there weren't too many people who filled out this quickly. So chances of them winning is much bigger because they also go into the draw next week. So the survey is going to be open the entire week. And I'll do another draw from all people who filled out the evaluation next week. So probably January 27, after the survey is closed, someone's going to be happy as well. But one person is going to be happy now. And I drew their names. I know that she's not online right now, but just for all of you to witness. And her name is Barbara Ormsby. So Barbara, if you watch this later, you won the all access pass for all our summits. So congratulations. And thank you so much for your feedback in the survey today. And also to everyone else who filled it out today. Thank you so much for your feedback. It informs us about how to organize the next summit and what speakers you would like to see, if we need to change anything about the format or anything like that. So thank you so much for your feedback. So again, if you are watching and if you haven't filled out the survey, you can still do so for an entire week, and maybe next time you win. And it's an invitation for you to check your email after the summit close date, because I will let you know via email. Now, it's important that you keep our summit email address whitelisted. Otherwise, you do not know that you will have won an all access pass. So that's about that. Now, what's next after the SLS? How can you continue your participation? Now, most people, actually more than in other years, they made use of the All Access Pass. So many people bought the All Access Pass compared to the live participant ticket holders. And if you do not have one yet, then you can still do that at the during summit rate today, because tomorrow prices are going to convert to normal and they're going to be higher than they are today. So this is the URL. It's a long one. It's also in all the emails that we sent, probably at the bottom of the email where it says if you want to upgrade, you can do so here. That's the link. And there's 2 choices, recordings or premium. And the difference is recordings has the recordings, so video and audio. You have access to them, so you need to log into our online school, Lead Living Human Systems, in the platform Teachable, where you'll find all of them. If you already have a pass like that, you will have received an email to log in. I saw that many of the participants already did. Or you can buy a premium all access pass, and that one includes everything that recordings also has, plus downloadable audio files and downloadable transcripts. Now the transcripts is something that we try for the very first time this year, because as I mentioned before, many people from many different countries joined the summit, and most of them are not native English speakers. And so the closest that we can do, compared to subtitling everything, and mind you, many of the speakers use jargon. So when you watch them on YouTube, YouTube does not always subtitle well. There's many mistakes in there still. And we try to be of service and create the premium pass with the transcripts. The transcripts will become available tomorrow. So they're going to be in our online membership site. And if you have a premium pass, then you will find them. You will find an invite from us to access that, because it's in a separate space next to where you find access to videos and audio. Yeah, I think I said everything. Invites from Teachable have my name on it, so it says Jennifer Campbell. It does not say SLS 2020, so that's important to know. And you can enjoy the summit for an entire year. Next year's summit is going to be January 16, 2021. And until that time, you have access accordance to your all access pass. Then you can also continue in the online community on LinkedIn. So many of you, especially if you have an all access pass, you'll be learning at your own pace. And you can share your learning by posting on underneath a speaker's session image. I have all the images in there now. So if you have anything to say about any of the speakers, then just find them and you can post underneath. That helps in exchange and in communication amongst all of you and everyone who's there. We have over 250 people in there. That is also including people from last year's summit who are also in there. Yeah, this year we have, I think, at least 80 people from all attendees who also joined the online community space. So that's great. What you also can do is have a call with me. So if you don't win one, there is an option to request one, and you can just send an email to info@systemicleadershipsummit.com, and we'll contact you and see how we can shape that. So that's also an option if you want to see, okay, Jennifer, I want to assess and enhance the systemic change leadership capabilities in our organization, then you're free to contact us and see how we can schedule a call or an interaction around that. So that's after the SLS. I have a couple of closing words, and that is to thank everyone. First of all, the speakers. I've had so much fun and so many very deep conversations with you. Apart from like picking your brain about your experience, about your knowledge, about your examples, I also asked you more personal questions, like how all that knowledge and experience impacted you in your life, the choices that you made. Because I don't believe in a summit where we have people who talk from their experience, but where it's not embodied, or when they talk about experience that's just in the brain and not in the body. So that's why it's important for me to connect with you, and you all opened up about that. So thank you so much for doing that. Then a big thank you to all of you as participants. Thank you so much for tuning in and going on this incredible roller coaster. 23 sessions is not easy to process, and I completely understand that. It's a summit is like a banquet. You can easily overeat. But thank you so much for wanting to learn and taking all the information in that you wanted to take and you wanted to experience, and hopefully continue to experience in our membership area, in our online community space. And last but not least, I want to thank my team, my very small team, Yolanda, Maria. I'm going to tell you tomorrow also, and thank you tomorrow, but I also wanted to do this here. I have two ladies who support me, and I could not have done the summit without you. So we've come to the end of the Q&A session. I want to say thank you so much for watching and for tuning in. Also, if you are watching the replay, thank you so much for watching the replay of this session. If you have any questions about the summit, please send an email to info@systemicleadershipsummit.com. I myself or someone from my team will find your question there and connect with you. Thanks so much for tuning in, for your participation, and hopefully see you in the online community space or in the next Systemic Leadership Summit. Bye.